Hey, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to show a little bit of patience here in getting everybody in just because of the new schedule, getting accustomed to it. Those of you who did not take the quiz yesterday, there's a couple of you on this Zoom for sure. I need you to make sure you take your reading or notes quizzes, or else I'll have to put them in as zeros or 50%. I don't know what the school is going to come up with. In terms of the final exam, we have a staff meeting tomorrow at 7 a.m. and we'll find out more what they kind of came up with in the schedule and all that. Trust me, my wife's bugging me about it because she wants to know if I can quarantine or not before family gatherings for the holidays. So, oh yeah. As you can see, a little different background from Mr. Brunette today, as I am in the homestead, Brunette homestead. And that's because my kids were awake from 1:45 to 4:45 last night, both of them. So, I would call it a nightmare in hell, but I think the Congo and under King Leopold was worse, so it's not that bad, but it was pretty bad. So I have a slight headache, but I'm getting over it. Anyways, I hope everybody here is doing well. No more history puns for a minute. We're at 23, which is a little bit down, but we're going to get going here. Got some interesting stuff to talk about today. We got about 42 minutes to do it. No clue how long it's going to last. We're just going to talk through it. The more engaged you are, the more questions you ask, the more your video's on, the better the opportunity you have to learn here. But I'm not going to be some bully who's going to make you turn your video on or anything like that. That's up to you. Okay. Other thing, just on housekeeping type of stuff while I'm at it. I need you to be accountable for reading the chapters. I know it's not fun, but just by some of the quiz scores, I either wasn't reading or you didn't even take enough time to go through and look the answers up, because I thought some of them were pretty straightforward. So let's make sure we stick on it the next couple of weeks, because then you got another 2 weeks off, and it's not conducive to learning when you're out of school for, finals will feel like a week off for some of you. It's wild. So like I said, just continue to do your best and don't let your guard down now, please. All right. So today we get to kind of look at, gotta find the right one. There we go. We're going to look at a couple different things, but realistically, we're looking at imperialism in Asia and Africa. And we'll talk a little bit about American imperialism, probably in a different chapter. But you guys already saw this picture yesterday, so it shouldn't surprise you. But we're going to start off with kind of using the British example in India, because they go from using indirect rule to direct rule due to some circumstances. All right. So, write down what you want, take notes on your computer, or just listen. It depends on how your style is. That's up to you. Okay. But the old saying, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Take a look at the British Empire here on the map. Okay. Can somebody unmute and tell me why that saying would be applicable to this map? The sun never sets on the British Empire. Hannah.
Well, first of all, we can see just how widespread it is and how global it is, and like with time zones, and how it, like the sun like goes around the world. The sun isn't always shining on the same parts of Earth because Earth is spinning. So
Yeah.
like right now, how like we're awake, like people on the other half in like Asia and Europe are like it's like nighttime for them.
Exactly. So even though this is a bit of a metaphor, maybe it is actually factual. The sun never set on the British Empire. So The colonial the establishment of these colonies around the world gave Britain, um, on top of the economic advantage we had talked about last week or 2 weeks ago when you were actually in class, in the Industrial Revolution, continued with their policies towards colonization. India, though, was considered what they call their crown jewel. So if you take a look at the political cartoon, this became pretty common in the late 1800s as newspapers became more popular. Can I get Lucy McJunkins? Can you explain what is going on here in this political cartoon? Got to unmute for us, though. Sorry.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. But you can see like all of the countries. I mean, like you can see all of India up there. Like you can see him like getting money out of it. So he's basically like taking money like from India, kind of like using India to get more money for himself.
Yeah, and squeezing India. I mean, basically squeezing, India for its economic opportunities. And at first, it was cotton that caused millions of people to starve to death because they started making cotton instead of growing food. And then it switched from cotton to, does anybody know? What's it switch from? What's the cash crop that becomes commonplace after cotton? It's been in the news quite often here recently. Probably, we got a chat functioner. That's good. Tobacco's a good guess. We got that from people. Not tobacco, not sugar. Opium. Poppy plants. And poppy seeds is how you produce the drug opium, and that became the way that they opened up China. The British did through India, and then starving more people to death by not making food. So just kind of a quick review here. If you remember right, the BEIC is the British East India Company, and they controlled trade in India, and they worked together with the declining Mughal Empire to establish trade agreements. And this is essentially between what would be a trading post and indirect rule. If you remember right, the British East India Company could have their own soldiers, could act like their own government, could create their own treaties. You know that in a treaty in the United States, the Congress, Senate, and House of Representatives has to pass a treaty. In this instance, the British East India Company could set up whatever they wanted, and as long as they were bringing profits home, the government stayed out of it. Okay, well, with the Mughal Empire in decline, the British saw an opportunity to take advantage of India, which had a huge population, and also historically going all the way back to the Ganges and Indus rivers, like below them, having some of the best agriculture in the world. If you remember right, this was one of the River Valley civilizations and one of the first places where people farmed, and so very fruitful land. And with the decline of the Mughal, if you remember right, they had Hindu princes paid the Mughal taxes, and the Mughal let them continue to practice Hinduism and let the Hindu princes control their own land. But as that declined, and as Muslim rule declined, take a look at the map here. I think it's pretty interesting. So you can see in the green are areas where Muslim land in 1765, and then Muslim land by 1805 in like the light green. You can see that the Muslims lose quite a bit of territory to the Hindus. And then in the other kind of a lighter yellowish color, I'd call it creamish maybe, you can see where the British start to exert their power by 1805. So do you see kind of the chaotic train wreck that is happening right in front of on this map? That's going to leave in peril this subcontinent because of the mix of the two religions, the decline of the Gupta, or sorry, not the Gupta, the Mughal, and then the coming of the British. And remember, in 1805, it's basically when the population in Britain starts to go up, thus the demand for cotton, for more resources, and started the Industrial Revolution. So it kind of all makes sense here. The British East India Company was somewhat, I would say, like half and half. Like they allowed Indians to keep their own ways, but they did try to bring in, some subtle changes that could be looked at as like, okay, if you were Western, this is socially better for you. But if you are Indian, well, you're trying to end our way of life that we've had for, 2,500 years now. That's not cool. So they did bring in some Western education. They tried to get rid of the caste system. That doesn't blend real well with capitalism, caste system. I don't ever think I say this word right. Sati, however you want to say it. Again, not good at it, but you can see what's happening here is just like in the Mughal Empire, they tried to get rid of this practice of women committing suicide if their husband died. We talked about the spread of Christianity already. And early on, this is seen as an attempt to kind of eliminate the fabric of India. And I mean, the caste system, although not legal, still exists today. So what do you want to say? It's part of their culture and tradition. Things didn't really go down, and there wasn't really. It wasn't great relations. The British East India Company primarily used Indian soldiers to protect their trade routes and protect their agreements, and they had British officials with Indian princes. But in 1857, a revolt was sparked by the killing of a British general. And it revolved around a new gun that was formed. So if you guys take a look at this, this is called the Enfield rifle. And it was made in 1853. And it could shoot more accurately and further. And so to use this, if you look how it was done, you had they made a cartridge that had paper casing, gunpowder, a bullet, and then grease on the outside of the bullet so that it would go into the barrel of the gun with a ramrod. You can kind of see how this works right here. But in order to open this, soldiers were required to bite the end off of the paper casing, which was greased with pig fat or cow fat. Okay, sounds disturbing, but I mean, how many of you eat bacon or, I don't know, pork chops or had ham or, I don't know, watch your parents or somebody make a turkey in the last few days. That's not the cleanest thing I've ever seen either. So it is what it is. But if you remember right, back to like way earlier in the semester, cows are sacred to Hindus and Muslims are not allowed to eat pork. So this is directly against the primary tenets of Hindus and Muslims, angering both religions. So what happens then is this sparks off what's known as the Sepoy Mutiny. Okay? And the Sepoy Mutiny, again, it happened in a kind of a remote fort, but it then spread throughout the country, and it became kind of a rare time when Hindus and Muslims actually worked together to get rid of the British, the BEIC, British East India Company. So here you can see kind of a picture of the fighting. You've got Hindu Muslim armies that aren't that organized fighting against a much, much, much weaker and a lot less British like officials, but the British had way better technology. And so you had shooting ranges set up by both sides. If you're curious, you can go look at primary sources of basically Indians being put on front of cannons and cannons being shot, so putting holes through people. And both sides were accused and did commit atrocities against each other. But the British sent in a bunch of soldiers then and crushed the rebellion within a year later. Now, why this is kind of significant, okay? So atrocities are committed by both sides. This is going to lead to mistrust between the British and Hindus and Muslims, which make up India. Now, British East India Company also then proved that they could no longer effectively govern India. It was too much. Okay. And so this leads to, as you probably could guess, direct rule in India, 1857. All right. And why is just why Lucy McJunkin said earlier in class is they were squeezing India for everything they could, and now they're going to put even more pressure on them. Okay. So there are 1857 till I want to say like 1951. Don't quote me on that year. The British rule India directly. Okay, and there's some positives and some negatives that come out of this. Okay, positives are they do enact some Western style reforms, but realistically, it's so that they can make more money. So roads, railroads, bridges, telegraphs and postal service, improved irrigation, new laws, creation of not really like creation of high schools, like minimal levels of schools, giving women more rights. I don't know if you remember, it's a very patriarchal society in India, or was, and allowing some Indians, like even Mahatma Gandhi would be a good example, going to school and be in Cambridge, in England. So upper class parents, kids got to go to school in South Africa or in Great Britain. But on the other hand, with obviously the positives come the negatives. So India is abused as a resource-rich colony. And if the British were going to spend that much money, they were going to make sure that they made as much off it as they could. So Indians were forced to buy British goods instead of had their own organic local system that they had used for thousands of years. Farmers grow cash crops like cotton and opium rather than growing, some type of wheat to produce food. And that means that, again, at certain times, millions of people die due to British farming tactics, which, again, emphasis was on creating more and more cash crops, less goods, or less and less food. And then the idea that you're providing the resources, you're doing the labor, but you are getting zero representation. I mean, I think that model's we've already seen how that works. Okay. And then the idea that centuries old customs are being replaced with, this whole idea of westernization. Okay. So which one of these is more positive? The negative? I mean, which one do you think is more impactful, the negative or the positive? Somebody weigh in here. Let's get a couple people. Feel free to use the hand raise function. What do you think? I mean, you got to almost think about India's economy to this day, too. It's one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Their university system, their technology. What do you think? We got a chat. We got some in the chat. Here we go. We got negative, 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 negative. Well, I can see how people could argue that way. Could somebody take a stance on the positive side? Just to play devil's advocate. Wilson, are you out there? You're good at this.
Oh,
Oh, man. What do you think?
I'm not sure with this. I kind of agree with them.
Negative?
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is, though, when we use this as a reference to the continent of Africa and how at least the British are putting some money and infrastructure into this and some exposure to education versus what they do to the continent of Africa, which is the most part carve it up and abuse it. So I'm with you, Nate. Hannah, what do you think?
Yeah, for the positive side, even though they were being abused, but yeah, like you said, I think it just gave it more structure and exposing them to westernization technologies and systems, like allowing for the higher education, like in high school, but not for college. But it also, I just keep looking at the railroads and the telegraphs and how it united people. So I think that could be a pretty good positive because you're just uniting more of the continent or of the country, not the continent.
Well, it's a subcontinent and it's diverse, but you're providing some kind of groundwork, I think, right?
Mm-hmm. And
Yeah,
like a kind of.
exactly. All right. We could continue on debating about this for a while, but fortunately, we don't have a ton of time. Those of you participating, thank you. So this leads to what we call a rise of nationalism, which you guys already know what that means. We've talked about it quite a bit. So, why? Okay, it's treated as second-class citizens, paid less, had no say in their government, and they were barred from like the top jobs. Okay, those went to settlers, either from Britain or from South Africa, basically white people. All right. And so it's not the first generation that realizes this, but it's by the time you get the second or third generation, it's pretty obvious that they were treated unfairly. And the education piece goes hand in hand with this. When you educate people and they read Voltaire and they read Locke and they read JJR, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, like they start to realize, whoa. You are these enlightened folks, but yet you're treating us like, second-class citizens, or you're not giving us any say. But again, it takes a couple generations for that to kick in, and what you end up with then is the growth of nationalism in India, and it's in two different ways, and that's why Pakistan, India, and Bengal and India are three different countries. You guys understand that? So the INC is created in 1885. That is made up of educated Hindus, like college-educated Hindus. And then the Muslim League, made up of college-educated Muslims, was formed in 1906. Both were created to get rid of Britain, and both were created to try to eliminate the direct rule the British had over India. Okay. From this comes Mahatma Gandhi, salt marches, these movements. Does that make sense? To everybody, it's kind of like, so it goes hand in hand. I mean, you had to have, it takes a while. It takes two world wars and a lot more pain and suffering for the subcontinent because they have to give up so much more. But eventually after that, they're going to gain their independence. All right, so that kind of covers India as much as you probably need to know, but that's an example of hopefully you can see Da Gama showing up in the early 1500s or late 1400s all the way to the Dutch and the French all having a say in it, and then the British taking over, BEIC, then Sepoy Rebellion, direct rule, and then by the time World War II is over, you have end of British influence. All right, let's move over to Africa, still in the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, so here's a map of the partition of Africa. Can anybody unmute and tell me what the word partition means?
Separation.
Yeah, pretty close. To split up. Good. To separate. Good, Jackson. Thank you. Africa in one fell swoop went from being a series of trading posts to becoming completely colonized in the second half of the 19th century. This map should give you a good idea of who got what and where. Before I even go into it, who do you think were the colonial, who was the winner here?
France.
Based on most valuable resources, who do you think was the winner?
French.
Yeah, France.
So I love when I get that response. I kind of baited you into that response. I'm not trying to be mean, but is it valuable to control the desert? I mean, the Sahara Desert is larger than the size of the United States. So that's a lot of their land that they control. Hannah, what do you think?
I was thinking the British or even the Spanish because they actually control like the port cities and probably the more colonized areas. Because I feel like also we were talking about how like inner Africa wasn't as like developed as like the outer regions because they were in contact with more of the world. So I think it'd be more valuable to have stuff on the coast.
So I'm going to go with you, and I think it was Lily Dole who also put British question mark. I mean, the British almost established an entire area of land that stretches from north to south, which would allow them to create railroads and telegraph lines. But Nigeria is one of the most heavily populated areas in the world. It has oil. Egypt, we'll talk about that importance in a second. You have area close to the what's known as the Beak of Africa. And then Rhodesia and the Union of South Africa, the states of South Africa. I mean, these are very, very profitable areas. All right, so Otto von Bismarck, Germany unifies in 1871. Otto von Bismarck realizes that Germany is way behind the game. Okay, way behind the game. So he calls for this conference that he's going to host in the Kaiser Wilhelm. So Kaiser Wilhelm is the leader of Germany. He's going to host this at his house. And he's going to do this because this guy is the master politique. All right, remember? And he's kind of known as the Bismarck diplomacy, we call it. So he realizes Germany's behind. He wants to avoid a world war between Russia, Britain, France, United States, Germany. And so he calls together all European powers and invites the United States to host this conference where they are going to have a discussion about how they're going to colonize the continent of Africa. What's wrong with this picture? You can either post it in the chat box or you can just unmute and say the obvious.
There's no representation.
Oh, you muted. You kicked out on us at the last second here. Try that again, will you? Oh, still frozen. Sorry. Lucy, were you going to say there's no representation from anyone from the continent of Africa?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the only Muslim country that was invited was the Ottoman Empire. Okay. The rest were white Europeans who met to discuss, again, the fate of the entire continent of Africa. So let's talk about this real quick. Africa prior to 1870 was known as the Dark Continent. for a lot of like really middle-aged European reasons. They thought that God had left a mark on it. It was if you go past a certain part, you would fall off into the abyss, into hell. That the Muslims had controlled the entire continent, so it was incapable of being ruled. Realistically, between what we talked about yesterday, the diseases, and the malaria, and the fact that there was a disease that caused European horses to die if they tried to move into the interior. Europeans did not have access to the interior of Africa. Okay. Then came along, which we talked about yesterday. We don't really need to go into it that much, but basically for all these reasons, which some of it's, we said scientific interest, a lot of it was industrialism and the need to continue to drive the Industrial Revolution in the second half. You've got this renewed interest in the continent. And the unfortunate thing about this is that you've got a Scottish missionary. And if you guys remember, the Scots are Calvinists. Remember? Calvinists are like pretty devout Christians. They believe in predestination, etc. All right. So Dr. David Livingstone is a doctor, a missionary who is sent in and is the first white European to find the start of the Nile River. All right. He is the first European to really go into the interior of Africa. And the problem is he made 2 or 3 exhibitions there, and then he would come back, and then he would lecture, all right, to a lot of different like societies, historical societies that wanted to listen to him to learn about the continent of Africa. Well, no one really listened to him, as there wasn't this demand for more resources. Well, he got lost, and no one had heard from him for a handful of years. And so an American, from the United States newspaper journalist, Henry Morton Stanley, was sent to look for Livingstone in the continent and see if he could find him. And so his perilous journey into the interior of Africa was written in these newspaper articles, which were sensationalized. Everyone, you guys know what sensationalism is, okay? And this created a lot of interest amongst different European leaders who got their hands on this and said, we didn't know all this existed, okay? And so Livingstone and Stanley actually meet up. And they meet up, and the famous saying is Stanley goes up to Livingstone, who's probably sticks out like a sore thumb, and says, "Dr. David Livingstone, I presume." It's like, nope. It's the other random lost dude who's in the middle of Africa. Yes, of course it is, dummy. But the difference is Livingstone was a good guy, was actually trying to be a missionary, and for the most part, again, there's not much in history that's going to go out as the way they say that Livingstone was trying to do this. But unfortunately, his mission opened up and exploited the continent for the rest of Europe. All right. The person who benefited the most from this was King Leopold II of Belgium. And you're probably saying to yourself, where did this Belgium guy character come from? His mother was French. His father was the first or second king of Belgium. And he took advantage of the fact that Stanley had made it out alive, and he hired Stanley to personally take a trip down the Congo River, and anywhere that he traveled, Stanley claimed that land for King Leopold, not for Belgium. So when this conference went down in 1884, King Leopold was granted, because they didn't want to have a war over who controlled the largest chunk of the interior of Africa. King Leopold controlled the Congo himself. It wasn't even Belgium's. He literally claimed it for himself. And he created a couple different organizations, like it was called like the IAI. You guys know acronyms are used, and oftentimes you hear an acronym, you're like, oh, that's a good acronym. I'm going to give to it on Giving Tuesday. Well, do a little research. The IAI was the International African, or IAA, International African Association. There's nothing philanthropic about that at all. And so he created these fake organizations underneath his name and told people around Europe that he was bringing civilization to Belgium, or to the Congo from Belgium, right? When in reality, at first he was making money off ivory, then he was making money off of what's called rubber, natural rubber. Okay, we don't use natural rubber today. We use vulcanized rubber, which is synthetically made. But natural rubber comes out of trees, like the one you see right in front of you. And you have to take a machete, slash a tree, and then the rubber comes out. You collect it in massive tubs, you heat it up, and it becomes natural, or it becomes rubber that you can then use to make hoses, which go into cars, wheels, which go onto bicycles or cars or anything. Okay. Belts, you name it. Rubber became extremely valuable in the 1880s. And so using an organization called the Force Publique, which was a police force that he had there, 10 million people perished between 1884 and basically 1908, and around that time period. Okay, it's called the genocide that nobody ever talks about. All right, 10 million people, as many people that died in the Holocaust, died because of this rubber terror. And once a tree was tapped out of rubber, it couldn't produce, a tree was done. It didn't produce more rubber. So it had to be chopped down and a new tree to be planted. Well, they would go around the Force Publique and they would go to each village and say, you owe me this amount of rubber, or you owe me this amount of hands. And as villages ran out of rubber, they obviously had to start chopping off hands. And so to show people this terror, you had the Force Publique creating strings of hands around villages, collecting them in big, huge waste bins. And it was that evidence that they found that ultimately brought Leopold down. But it was one newspaper writer who you guys are going to read a poem by today, if I can get to it, who exposed the atrocities. His name was Henry Morton Stanley. And they recognized that, and Edmund Morel, it was Edmund Morel, my bad. They recognized that the boats leaving Liverpool to go to Congo had a bunch of guns and swords on them, and they were coming back with a bunch of rubber. And they wondered how this association was supposed to be helping, was not bringing them Bibles or, clothes or anything. So Leopold sets off the scramble for Africa, and that leads to the Berlin Conference, which I was referring to earlier. Okay. And at the Berlin Conference, you can see the political cartoon here, the scramble for Africa. Basically, they agreed that the entire continent is open for seizure. So thousands of years of over 1,000 natural tribes, okay, in different languages spoken, are carved up into like 60 some odd countries or colonies. And all a country had to do was put a flag up and have one army base. And they could call that colony theirs. And so if you look at this picture right here, they literally took pencils out and carved the entire continent up without a natural understanding of the geographic barriers, of the people that existed, of the languages, the linguistic barriers, etc. okay, with pencils. A bunch of white diplomats did this. And again, this would really seal the fate of the continent of Africa. And there's issues today to this day because of this. I mean, you can't, it's, to me, it's unfathomable that it happened, but it's part of history. Again, I get a little worked up sometimes. Here's Bismarck. Africa looks like a cheese wheel, and what they're doing is just carving it up. You guys see that? And the rest, everyone else has their tongue sticking out like, oh, please, can we get some? Again, the only areas that remain independent are Liberia, because the British had promised that to be an independent place where slaves could return to from the British Empire, because when slavery had been eradicated. And then Ethiopia, which is Abyssinia on here, King Menelik II of Ethiopia organized his own industrial army and was able to defend himself from Italy until after World War I, when Mussolini would come back in and say, nope, we're taking it this time. Okay, but that would be the longest lasting. Ethiopia would be the longest lasting African kingdom. So some of the results here then, some things that are notable. First off, what time does this class end at? 1:30? Jeez. Okay. All right. All right. Ends at 1:30. I'm gonna have to stop. That's too much to do in one class period. Okay. I'll cover this tomorrow. I need someone to remind me though that we have to start with this tomorrow before we start our activity, okay? I just want to show you real quick what I want you to do for homework. I gotta find I'm gonna stop the share real quick. I got 2 minutes. I can do this. I think where is it? Canvas. All right. It didn't do it for me either. All right. On Canvas, you are going to, there we go. Stop. All right, Lucy, what can you see on the screen?
It just says Danielle Burnett has started screen sharing, and it's like black, but everybody else might be different.
Let me try again.
It's the same here.
All right, this should take care of it. Can you see my desktop now?
Yeah.
Okay, under modules, I know the bell's gonna ring here soon. Go down to the bottom, and it says poem analysis. So tonight, you're gonna read 2 poems. You're gonna read The Black Man's Burden and The White Man's Burden. And I want you to just post what you think the main argument or idea is by Kipling in The White Man's Burden and Morel in The Black Man's Burden, all right? Be ready to use these as a discussion for your class tomorrow, okay? This should not take you more than maybe 30 minutes. Don't go on Google and type in what is the main point of Kipling's White Man's Burden. Please try to read it and analyze it. It's a great activity for you. The white man's burden is kind of hard to understand. The black man's burden is pretty easy to get, okay? I'm not at school, so I'm sure the bell just rang. I want to let everybody go unless you have an individual question. And those of you who didn't take the quiz, please take it, okay? All right, no questions. All right, see you, everybody.